All right, so you're ready for a deep dive into the business of snacking.
Let's do it.
Today, we're going to be looking at Mondelēz International.
The snacking giant.
Yeah, exactly.
Behind so many brands that we know and love.
Yeah, and we've got a ton of information here. We've got their recent 10K filings, some news articles, even a few international legal agreements. So, yeah, we're ready to really dig in and understand how this company makes money.
What their costs are.
Yeah, how they stand out.
From all the competition. It's a crowded market.
Right. It feels like there's a snack for every, occasion and every person and flavor. And they're behind so many of them.
Yeah, they really are.
So by the end of this deep dive, you should have a really solid understanding of how this company operates.
What makes them tick?
Exactly.
I think one of the most fascinating things, just starting off the bat, is the sheer scale of Mondelēz's operations. You know, they sell products in over 150 countries. They have production facilities in 80.
Wow.
It's not like they're just relying on one market.
Yeah.
They're so diversified.
It is global.
It's a global empire.
When we say snacking giant, we mean like giant.
Giant, yeah.
So, okay, what are some of their biggest sellers? Like, what are the things that are really driving that revenue? Is it like all those classic, like, Oreo cookies and Cadbury chocolate?
Yeah, you're in the right ballpark for sure. I mean, biscuits and chocolate, those are their powerhouses. They drive a significant portion of their revenue, which, by the way, was $36 billion in 2023.
Wow, $36 billion. Okay.
Yeah. But they also have a really substantial presence in gum, candy, and even beverages.
Oh, wow. Okay. So they're really hitting all of those cravings. Like
They really are.
sweet, savory.
Thirst quenching, whatever you need, they've got you covered.
Okay, that makes sense. And you mentioned, like, they have a presence in so many countries. Are those all kind of like those global, those, Cadbury, Oreo? Or are there a lot of, like, local brands, too?
It's a great question. And yeah, it's not just those global brands. They've acquired a lot of strong local favorites, too. So it's kind of a combination. You know, you get those big names that are recognized everywhere, but then in specific regions, they might have brands that are really popular there, but you wouldn't necessarily find somewhere else.
Okay, so they're really meeting those cravings on kind of like a global and local level.
You really are.
But with all of that going on, it must be expensive to run a global snacking empire, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. And, you know, looking at their filings, there are a lot of costs that they have to manage.
Yeah, I was flipping through some of this stuff, and it seemed like commodity prices are a pretty big deal for them.
Huge, yeah. I mean, you think about it. Cocoa, dairy, wheat, all these agricultural products.
It's like a grocery list of ingredients.
It really is, right?
Yeah.
They need a ton of these raw materials, and the prices for those can fluctuate wildly.
Yeah, so what, are they just kind of at the mercy of the market then?
To some extent, yes, but they do try to mitigate that risk. They've got these strategies in place. They call them hedging strategies, which are basically ways to try to protect themselves from those big price swings.
Oh, interesting. So kind of like safeguards in place.
Exactly. But, you know, like, even they admit in their filings that these strategies aren't foolproof. Like, the world is unpredictable, things happen. The war in Ukraine, for example, that had a big impact on wheat prices.
Oh, right. Makes sense. So they're kind of always having to adjust and adapt.
All the time, yeah.
Wow, it sounds like a really complex operation.
It really is. And we haven't even touched on things like packaging, energy, and transportation costs.
Oh, right. All of that factors into, of course.
Oh, absolutely. You know, those are all influenced by global events as well. So, you know, if oil prices spike, that impacts transportation costs. If there's a shortage of cardboard, that impacts packaging. It's all connected.
It is all connected.
Yeah.
Oh, man. It's making my head spin a little bit.
Yeah.
But we can't forget about people, right?
No, absolutely not. You know, they have a massive global workforce. They're talking hundreds of thousands of employees.
Yeah, and I saw that they talk a lot about things like pensions in their reports, too, which that seems like a huge expense.
Oh, for sure. It's not just salaries they have to think about. It's benefits, healthcare, retirement plans.
Yeah, those long-term costs.
Yeah, those long-term costs. It's a huge part of their overall expenses, and it's something they're very aware of. And of course, you know, those costs can be sensitive to market fluctuations as well. Like if interest rates rise, that can impact their pension obligations.
Oh, wow. So, okay, we've talked about all the things that go into making these snacks and getting them to the consumer. And it's clear that it's a really expensive process.
It is, yeah.
But then, like on the flip side, what makes someone choose a Mondelēz snack over any other? Is it just brand recognition? Is it just that they've got those catchy jingles and those, really effective marketing campaigns?
Well, those definitely play a role, for sure. I mean, they've got some of the most iconic brands in the world.
Right.
But it's more nuanced than that. They're also really focusing on trying to meet the evolving needs of consumers.
Okay, what do you mean by evolving needs?
Well, think about it. Consumer preferences are constantly changing. People are more health conscious these days. They're looking for convenience. They're looking for snacks that fit their lifestyle.
Right.
And Mondelēz is trying to adapt to that. They talk a lot about this consumer-centric approach, which means they're really trying to understand what people want and then develop products that meet those needs.
Okay, so it's not just about creating a tasty snack. It's about like understanding the consumer, understanding their needs.
Exactly. And they're doing this in a number of ways. They're developing snacks with healthier ingredients. They're focusing on portion control and packaging. They're even looking at things like sustainability and ethical sourcing because those are things that consumers care about more and more these days.
Right, right. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I know I'm definitely more conscious of those things than I used to be.
Exactly. And they're tapping into that.
And I remember like they acquired Hue, right? That premium chocolate company.
Yes. And that's a great example of how they're using acquisitions to meet those evolving consumer needs.
Okay, explain that a little bit more.
So, Hue is known for its high-quality ingredients, its focus on health and wellness, and by acquiring them, Mondelēz is able to tap into that market.
So rather than like starting from scratch and trying to build a brand in that space,
They just bring in an established
they
brand.
bring in the expertise.
Yeah, that already has a loyal following. They already have those relationships.
Okay, so that's kind of a shortcut.
In a way, yeah, it's a way to quickly enter a new market or a new product category and start generating revenue right away.
Interesting. So they're not just creating snacks, they're also acquiring companies to really expand their reach.
Exactly.
That's fascinating. Okay, so we've talked about their revenue streams, their costs, but with so many snack companies out there, like what makes Mondelēz stand out? What's their secret sauce?
Well, I think a big part of it is just their sheer size and scale. Like we talked about earlier, they operate in over 150 countries.
Right.
They have this massive global reach, which gives them a lot of advantages.
Yeah.
For example, they have what we call economies of scale.
Okay, what does that mean?
It means they can produce and distribute snacks more efficiently because of their volume. So they might be able to get better prices on ingredients because they're buying in such large quantities. They might be able to negotiate better rates with shipping companies.
So it's like buying in bulk at Costco, but on a massive scale.
Exactly. And those cost savings can give them a competitive edge. But it's not just about size. They're also investing heavily in innovation.
Okay, so what does that look like? What kind of innovation are they doing?
Well, it's a couple of things. First, they're constantly developing new products, trying to come up with the next big snack hit. They have these huge research and development teams that are always experimenting with new flavors, new ingredients, new formats.
So they're trying to stay ahead of those trends we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. But they're also innovating in how they reach consumers. They're investing in e-commerce, direct-to-consumer channels, things like that.
So trying to cut out the middleman, go straight to the people who are buying those snacks.
Exactly. And that allows them to build stronger relationships with their customers, gather data about what people are buying and why, and potentially even personalize their offerings.
Wow, so they're really trying to stay ahead of the curve.
They really are. And another thing they're doing, which I think is interesting, is really emphasizing their commitment to values like DE&I and sustainability.
Right. I saw a lot about that in their materials. But is that like just good PR? Or is it actually part of their business strategy?
I think it's a bit of both, to be honest. I mean, in today's world, consumers are increasingly looking for companies that align with their values. So there's definitely a marketing element to it. But at the same time, I think they're genuinely trying to integrate these values into their operations.
So they're not just saying it, they're actually doing things to back it up.
Yeah, they're making efforts to source their ingredients responsibly, to reduce their environmental impact, to create a more diverse and inclusive workplace.
Okay, so that's encouraging.
It is. But of course, it's something we'll have to keep an eye on. Actions speak louder than words. And it remains to be seen how effectively they'll be able to implement these initiatives and what the long-term impact will be.
Right. It's definitely something to watch closely. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've looked at their revenue streams, their costs, their value proposition, their differentiation.
Yeah.
But if we had to like boil it down, what are the most critical things that Mondelēz needs to get right to keep this whole snacking empire running smoothly?
That's a great question. And I think it comes down to three key things.
Okay.
First, they need to be masters of supply chain management. Like we talked about earlier, they source ingredients from all over the world. They have to be able to navigate disruptions, manage those volatile commodity prices, ensure quality control across their entire supply chain. It's a massive logistical
It's like
challenge.
a global puzzle,
Yeah.
right, with all these moving pieces.
Exactly. And they have to be able to keep all those pieces in place, even when things go wrong. Second, they need to stay ahead of consumer trends. They need to be able to anticipate what people will be wanting to snack on in the future. So they need to be investing in market research, in trend analysis, in product development.
And they're trying to do that through, like, those acquisitions and stuff, right?
Right, exactly. They're trying to, kind of bring in those brands that are already ahead of the curve in certain areas.
Okay.
And then finally, they need to manage their portfolio effectively. They need to know which brands to invest in, which brands to maybe divest, when to make acquisitions, when to hold back.
It's like a constant balancing act.
It really is. And if they can get those three things right, I think they're well positioned to continue to be a leader in the global snacking market.
All right. Well, I'm definitely feeling a lot more informed about Mondelēz.
Yeah.
We've only just scratched the
Oh,
surface.
yeah, there's so much more we could dig into.
But it's already clear that it's a really complex and fascinating business. So, listener, stick with us, and we'll continue this deep dive into the world of Mondelēz.
We'll be right back. Welcome back.
All right, so we're back.
Ready to keep digging.
I'm ready to keep snacking on this information.
Mm-hmm.
Last time we talked about these three really critical areas that Mondelēz needs to focus on, which was like that supply chain management, understanding consumer trends, and then that strategic portfolio management. Let's start with the supply chain.
Okay.
You were describing it as like this incredibly complex global network.
It is, yeah. It's really a fascinating thing when you think about it. Imagine coordinating a network of suppliers and production facilities and distribution channels all over the world.
All over the world.
And
Yeah.
you're dealing with these like fluctuating commodity prices for ingredients like cocoa, dairy, all of
Mhm.
that. And then throw in like a global pandemic or a war in a key sourcing region.
Right, like what could go wrong?
Exactly. But that's the reality for Mondelēz.
Yeah. That sounds like, a logistical nightmare.
It is. It's really impressive how they manage it. And there are like hints of that complexity everywhere in these documents. Like, we talked about those volatile commodity prices.
Right.
One way they try to manage that is by using these like hedging strategies,
Okay.
which are basically these calculated bets that they're making to try to protect themselves from those big price swings in the ingredients they need. But, as they admit themselves, these strategies aren't foolproof. Like, the world is just too unpredictable.
You can't plan for everything, right?
Exactly. And then there's the whole complexity of managing labor costs across a global workforce,
Mhm.
with different regulations in different countries, different currencies, all those pension obligations we discussed. It's really a lot to keep track of.
Oh, yeah. So they're always kind of juggling those internal factors like labor costs with those unpredictable external forces that are happening.
Yeah, it's like walking a tightrope,
Constantly.
constantly adapting, yeah. And that brings us to the second critical area, which is anticipating consumer trends. Like they have entire teams dedicated to just trying to understand what people will be wanting to eat, to snack on next.
Like the future of snacking.
Yeah.
It's like a crystal ball for cravings.
Exactly. It's like
Yeah.
trying to predict what the next big flavor is going to be or what kind of health trends are going to emerge that are going to impact snacking. And they have to get it right because if they miss the mark,
Yeah, then some other company's going to get that market share.
exactly, they'll lose market share and they could fall behind.
So how are they, like, what are some examples of how they're adapting to those changing tastes?
Well, like think about the rise of health-conscious snacking, right?
Right.
Like people are looking for healthier options, but they don't want to sacrifice taste. So, Mondelēz has been expanding its portfolio with acquisitions like Who, which is that premium chocolate brand known for its like simple ingredients, and Cliff Bar, which, makes those protein bars kind of targeted at active individuals.
So they're kind of using those acquisitions to try to stay ahead of those curves and kind of cater to all those different preferences that people are having.
Exactly, yeah. They're trying to cover all their bases. It's really smart.
That's a smart move.
Yeah.
What about that third area that we talked about, though, that managing the portfolio? That sounds like something that's a little bit more high-level strategy than day-to-day operations.
It's both, actually. It's both. Think of it like a gardener tending to a really sprawling garden. They need to nurture their existing plants, so to speak. like those established brands that generate a lot of revenue.
Right, the classics, the Oreos.
Right, yeah, like your Oreos, your Cadbury Dairy Milk, all those. Those are like your reliable performers, your steady earners. But at the same time, they also need to be on the lookout for new seeds to plant. So strategic acquisitions that can fill gaps in their offerings or that give them access to new markets. Like we were just talking about, with Cliff Bar, they get into that protein bar market, and sometimes they need to do some pruning too.
Pruning. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, sometimes it makes more sense to sell off a part of the business that's not performing as well as expected, or that's no longer strategically aligned with their overall goals. Like, remember, we saw that they mentioned the sale of their developed market gum business.
Right, right.
That's a prime example of pruning. They're streamlining their portfolio, getting rid of things that aren't really working for them anymore so they can focus their resources on areas with more growth potential.
It's like constantly assessing and adjusting and kind of optimizing.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a dynamic process. They're always evaluating their portfolio, making sure it's aligned with their long-term vision.
It's like a constantly moving target.
It is. It is. And on top of all of that, they're also dealing with all these external factors that we've talked about. The global economic conditions,
Hmm.
the political uncertainty, the currency
Well, we
fluctuations.
touched on that earlier, but those seem pretty significant.
Yeah, they are. And Mondelez is very aware of those risks. They talk about them extensively in their reports.
So are they, like, how are they positioned to handle those potential disruptions?
Well, they've got a few strategies in place. For example, they're very conscious of the volatility in commodity prices. And we talked about those hedging strategies they use, right,
Yeah.
to try to buffer themselves against those price swings. But they're also realistic about the limitations of those strategies. Like,
Yeah.
they acknowledge that they can't completely protect themselves from every price fluctuation.
It's good that they're transparent about it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're not trying to pretend that they have all the answers. And then, when it comes to things like geopolitical uncertainty, well, the war in Ukraine is a really stark reminder of how those events can just throw a wrench into global operations.
Right.
Like, commodity prices were impacted, especially for wheat. And Mondelez had to make some tough decisions. Like, they actually had to close some of their facilities in Ukraine for a time because of damage. So, they're constantly having to navigate these turbulent waters. And it really highlights the importance of being adaptable and having contingency plans in place.
Yeah. It's really eye-opening when you think about it. Like, something as simple as a bag of chips
Right.
is actually connected to all these global events.
Exactly. And it's not just geopolitics either. We haven't even touched on currency fluctuations yet.
Yeah.
They operate in so many different countries, each with its own currency,
Right.
and those exchange rates are constantly in flux.
So that can have a huge impact on their financials.
Oh, absolutely. It can make it really difficult to predict their earnings, to plan for the future, and it's just another layer of complexity that they have to deal with.
Yeah, it is. So it seems like, even for a company as large and as successful as Mondelēz, running a global business is like this incredibly delicate dance.
It is, yeah. It's a balancing act. They're constantly trying to balance their internal operations with these external forces that are often totally unpredictable. It requires foresight, agility, a willingness to adapt and change course when necessary. And speaking of adapting and changing, one of the things that's really interesting is how Mondelez is trying to respond to those shifts in consumer expectations, particularly when it comes to things like sustainability and DE&I.
Right. Yeah, we saw a lot about that in their materials.
And it makes you wonder, are they doing this because they genuinely believe in these values? Or is it more about protecting their brand image and appealing to those consumers who are increasingly demanding these things from companies?
It's a tough question. Like, is it altruism or is it just good business?
Yeah, exactly. But the interesting thing is those two things aren't necessarily mutually exclusive, right? Like they can be doing it for both reasons.
It can be good for the world and good for their bottom line.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes it so fascinating to analyze. We can look at their actions, we can look at their statements, but ultimately, only time will tell what their true motivations are and what kind of impact they'll have.
It's something we'll have to keep an eye on, for sure.
Yeah, and it's definitely something we'll be watching as we continue to follow Mondelez's journey in the years to come. Because, ultimately, how they handle these issues is going to have a huge impact, not just on their own business, but potentially on the entire snacking industry.
Yeah, and, maybe even on, like, how we think about the snacks that we're consuming.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It makes you think about those choices we make every day and what those choices actually represent.
It really does. All right, so we've talked about the supply chain, we've talked about consumer trends, we've touched on those external risks, and it's clear that Mondelēz is really operating in this complex ecosystem, and they're doing a pretty good job of navigating it, at least for now.
Yeah, they seem to be doing well.
But as we head into the final part of this deep dive, I'm really curious to hear your final thoughts on all of this. What does this all mean for Mondelēz's future? Do they have what it takes to stay on top of this constantly changing snacking world?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I think we'll have some really interesting insights to share in the next segment. We'll be talking about those challenges and opportunities, and we'll leave you with some final food for thought.
Ooh, I like that. Some food for thought.
Pun intended.
Yeah, of course. So listeners, stay tuned. We'll be right back with the final part of our deep dives into the world of Mondelēz International.
Welcome back. We're wrapping up our Mondelēz deep dive. It's been a journey, right? From their global reach to their financials and even how they're approaching, sustainability and DE&I. I feel like I've learned so much.
I think we both have. It's amazing how much goes on behind the scenes of a company like this. It's not just about, whipping up a batch of cookies.
Definitely not. It makes you think differently about what's happening when you grab a snack. Yeah, it really does.
Remember how we were talking about their strategy of balancing global and local?
Right. They've got those huge global brands that everyone recognizes. But they also really focus on tailoring their offerings to different regions.
Like meeting those local tastes.
Exactly. Even some of those legal agreements we looked at showed that, like country-specific terms for things like employee stock options.
Oh, wow, that's interesting. So they really are thinking about those regional differences.
They are. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach at all. They're constantly adapting.
And speaking of adapting, what about those big external risks we talked about? All those things that could disrupt their plans no matter how carefully they've thought things through.
You mean things like the global economy, politics being unstable, currencies going up and down?
Yeah, all of that. That stuff seems like it could really throw them off course.
You're right. It's a volatile world out there.
Yeah.
And you can see in their financial reports how those external factors can hit their bottom line.
It really shows you how interconnected everything is.
It does. Remember when we talked about the war in Ukraine and how that disrupted things?
Hmm.
And they're also worried about, things like inflation impacting how much people are willing to spend.
Right. Makes you realize that no company is immune to those global shifts, even a giant like Mondelēz.
Nope, not at all. They have to be ready to change course, make tough decisions.
It's like they're playing a constant game of chess, trying to anticipate every move.
Great analogy. But here's the thing. Those challenges can also create opportunities. Think about how e-commerce has changed things.
Yeah, that gives them a way to connect directly with customers.
Exactly. They're taking those disruptions and turning them into ways to improve.
So it's not just about surviving, it's about finding ways to thrive.
Exactly. And it brings us back to that question about sustainability and DE&I. Are they truly committed? Or are they just responding to what consumers want these days?
It's hard to say for sure.
Right. We need to see how those commitments translate into real actions.
Actions speak louder than words.
Exactly. It all comes down to how they actually operate, how transparent they are, and how consumers respond.
Well, listener, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the world of Mondelēz International. We've covered a lot of ground, right? From how they make money to how they manage costs, what makes them different, and all those essential operations.
We've seen how they balance global and local, how they handle risks and changing trends, and we've raised some really important questions about, how they can grow responsibly in a way that's good for the world and not just their bottom line.
It's been a fascinating journey. And hopefully, listener, you've come away with a better understanding of this complex world behind the snacks we enjoy.
I hope so. The next time you reach for, say, an Oreo, think about everything that went into it.
All those decisions, the global forces at play.
It's a reminder that even a simple snack is part of a much bigger story.
Absolutely. And on that note, we'll say goodbye. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and until next time, happy snacking.